Yeah.
Okay, this is the Senate Transportation Committee. It's Thursday, February 22nd. We're resuming our discussion of the fiscal year 25 budget for the agency, and today we have Patrick Murphy.
Great. Thank you. For the record, Patrick Murphy, Vermont Agency of Transportation. Where we left off, Andrea Wright, who leads our unit, was just getting finished talking about the carbon reduction program, the PROTECT program, which is focused on resiliency efforts. Those are two of the three federal programs, formula-funded programs that have come under the IIJA. So this is the third National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Program. All of them involve plans developed by the agency, but this is the one that requires the plan before federal funding will be authorized. So the PROTECT program doesn't require a plan. We did one, as you remember, to be able to access that higher federal match. And the carbon reduction strategy was submitted in November of this past year, and just approved this week by FHWA. So we've submitted two NEVI plans in 22 and 23, which have allowed us to have access to over $13 million worth of funds. And then you all, in the past couple of years, have authorized $6.25 million in 2022, which included $2 million of ARPA funds, and then the remainder for NEVI funds. And then last year it was 7.625, I think, in NEVI funds. So one of the sort of big differences from last year to this year is just that now we've sort of caught up nearly to what the annual federal appropriation has been, and so we have a lower funding request for this year, which is just $4.8 million.
Caught up in that you spent.
Caught up because the first fiscal year, federal fiscal year 22 and 23 kind of got all lumped together in the first round of NEVI.
Did you talk about the plan in here? Like there's the specific plan about where the infrastructure.
Yeah, we didn't go into the plan further because it's just a budget presentation.
Right.
But certainly, I think we have been in a couple of times. But basically, the first 15 or 16 or so sites would get us to what FHWA considers fully built out. And that's identified.
Those identified corridors, which is basically 89, 91, and 37.
So 89, 91, parts of 7.
Right.
Route 2.
Yeah. So there's
Or maybe.
we've got pretty much all of the state covered, but there's parts of it within the middle of the state, like 100, and then some of the east to west routes aren't covered yet. That was a strategic decision not to designate more corridors until we have this fully built out, because once we have it fully built out, we have more flexibility with the federal funds. We don't necessarily have to locate on the alternative fuel corridors then, and we don't have to locate at the levels that are required by NEVI. But the intention is to use other funding to continue to build out those areas that aren't on the corridors as well. So we have the carbon reduction funds, which might do some of that work, but then there are competitive grants through the IIJA that we'll continue to seek to build out off corridor. So that's where we are. Our first location is under contract with Norwich Technologies to be hopefully completed within the next month.
So what's your local? Where's the local one?
Yeah, so the local in this case is the private sector match. so it's not like the municipality is putting up all of that, money. It's, expected that the private sector will put that match up. And in some cases, we're hoping that it will be, an even greater match.
So
So,
like if you installed a gas station might see a benefit to it, and so they would pay that match.
very likely, it won't be the gas station.
It'd be like the charge point.
Yeah, it'll be the charging provider. And the charging provider is working with the site host, which might be a gas station or
Right.
some other entity. And that agreement is between those two parties, but, any other questions on that? Okay.
And on this next slide, do you have the projections of funding beyond 26, or is this the NEVI money is
It's
run out?
authorized with the 5 years of federal funding, so it remains to be seen what will happen next. Yeah. And this is just showing you how the funding has changed, both because of the federal fiscal years and then having to sort of play catch up, last year with what had already been authorized by the, FHWA.
So, going
Sure.
back on the money.
Yeah.
The transportation bill authorization. That's us?
Yes.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure it wasn't related to any of the federal legislation.
No, this is, so in the, 22 transportation bill, 6.25 was
And the
authorized.
NEVI is not in the T-bill,
The NEVI is, yeah.
so how are you counting it? In the T-bill authorization or the NEVI apportionment? Can't count it twice.
Like for us
Yeah.
at 24, you have 4.5 of NEVI, and then, but the total is 7.6.
Right,
Or
so
is that
this
a
is,
total, or is that additional to the?
no, this is not additional. This is to understand the kind of overlap, of when it was authorized by the state and when it's been authorized, apportioned by the federal government.
So the
So-
T-bill actually incorporates the NEVI
That's right.
spending.
Yeah.
All right, so,
So
the only difference then is 26, 25 is what you're proposing, and
That's right.
26, God knows what.
And so 26 would just be we finally kind of catch up to what the actual federal apportionment is, which would just be the 4.5 million.
You would think that the transportation bill authorization line would equal the total of the other two,
So when it was first,
but I guess not, because 26 hasn't been approved.
right, when it was first included in the 22 transportation bill, recommendations, it wasn't understood at that point, because guidelines hadn't been developed, that there was only gonna be $3.1 million. There was a sort of holdback in that first year to create the Joint Office of Energy and Transportation. So they didn't apportion as much in that first year.
So
So,
25 in the T-bill, which is what we're concerned about.
Yeah.
NEVI gives us 4.5, the T-bill has 4.8.
right, and that's catching us up because there's still a remainder that could have been authorized from last year's federal fiscal year.
Just that's $300,000.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it's just,
We didn't give you the spending authority.
no. So it's just bringing us up to basically where we need to be, and then it'll align in this next
So I guess,
fiscal year.
then the one thing that's served out in the future, at least through 26, is the 4.5 NEVI.
That's right.
And then probably the T-bill will only, in 26, would reflect the 4.5.
Right. And then, like I said, we're actively pursuing the competitive grants that would allow us to build on that 4.5 million.
Okay.
So this is just kind of giving you a sense of where we are, the status of the incentive programs. There's no request for additional funds within.
You'll have to redo it after we move money from Replace Your Ride to Mileage Smart.
Yes, that's right. And so these are funds that were initially authorized in the 22 transportation bill, and that were envisioned to last over 3 years. Because of the changes that you authorized last year, we were able to make in late July. We've greatly increased the number of incentives in all of the programs, so the funds are running out more quickly. And this next slide shows that.
If I remember, we gave more leeway to the agency to make changes to the incentive program, right?
That's
So
right.
you guys could decide to slow it down next year. So
That's right. Yeah, there are some caveats to that. So, for example, the Mileage Smart program, we could slow it down and create a smaller incentive for those at the kind of higher income level within
Right.
8% AMI, but we couldn't just say, somebody making 70% AMI doesn't get one at all.
Do we need to redo this because the House has agreed with us with
Yes,
this?
this is a slide prior to the budget adjustment. So it was initially.
Well, they just agreed with us this morning.
Okay, so these slides were not made this morning. So yeah, but this is to give you a sense of sort of how quickly we're spending things down and where we might end up. So if you sort of visually try and add the 500,000 to Mileage Smart and then subtract a further 5 from Replace Your Eye, that will get you maybe a couple more months for each. Other parts of the work that we do at environmental policy, sustainability, we're working on the mileage-based user fee, which we discussed last week in committee, and we're hopeful that we'll be able to apply for a grant this spring. We're also looking at updating the transportation energy profiles, something that's been done every other year, and then looking at other things like solar access in the right of way and a variety of measures related to the agency's energy.
Is the transportation energy use, that's total for the state, it's not for like the agency?
It's total for the state, that's right.
It's like, that's where we get our number of miles traveled.
That's right.
You said something that you're hopeful that we'll apply for the grant for the MBUF. That's what we authorized last year. What are the concerns why it might not happen? You say hopeful as an answer.
Well, because it was supposed to be announced in November of 2022. It still hasn't been announced.
By the feds.
By the feds, yeah.
We don't really know why it's taking.
We don't. There was a notice in the Federal Register on sort of updating their application, but nothing substantive. So I think they're getting closer to being able to release it, but we haven't had an update there. Yeah. And then there's just the general environmental work that isn't captured by those 3 federal programs or the incentive programs. It's working on contaminated soils and wildlife crossings, a variety of things.
I guess it must be natural resources. It's attracted to.
It's trapping, yeah, it's the hunting 240, 258 bill.
Some things you shouldn't do before election.
I think they said they had 60 wins. Okay.
So this is our team. This is probably one of the biggest changes since last year. It's just we were a team of 2 and now we're a team of 5, which has really increased our capacity and ability to get out federal grant applications and hopefully be able to get out a lot of funding in different grant programs.
Yeah, are the new positions federally funded?
In part, yeah. In part, they're funded. two of the new positions are sort of more temporary positions. They're limited service positions.
Do they come with federal grants? We would have had to authorize those limited service
They were authorized
last year.
or the year before maybe.
It sounds kind of, Patrick, that these 5 positions probably create more opportunity than what they're costing.
That's true, yes. You know, Hillary Del Ross, as soon as she joined, she was working in the Agency of Commerce Community Development. As soon as she joined, began supporting a grant application for millions of dollars for EV charging. We weren't ultimately successful, but that's the kind of work that they are supporting, to take advantage fully of what's out there for federal funds and hopefully take the pressure
Would
off
that be
the
under
state.
the IIJA competitive grant?
That's
that
right.
You're talking about?
I only know what I know. Sometimes that's dangerous, but it is, always been kind of impressed by the amount of, grants that we seem to get our fingers into. And, I would always totally support, this right here where we can go after these federal funds, because at the end of the day, they're gonna go to somebody and they might as well go to us.
And so that's also, you know, when I showed the slides on the incentive programs and where they're at, that is our hope. That's why we asked for some of the changes to be able to extend out the programs, to be able to get to a point where we can add more federal funding in. So the Agency of Natural Resources is leading that grant application to the EPA. It's nearly $100 million across a variety of sectors, but there's a substantial transportation component that will allow us to apply for almost $20 million to keep the incentive programs going, another $5 million, I think, to keep some of the community EV charging going. So that's our kind of strategy, is to be able to use the funding that was authorized in 22 for state funding. Originally, it was kind of envisioned actually as ARPA funds, and then when those freed up other general funds, that's where it went into these programs. And so it's to kind of layer in federal funding, which might become available as early as October of this year.
Well, human nature is a path of least resistance sometimes, and if you guys have your stuff together versus another state, and they're looking at just you and them, sometimes it just comes to,
Well, Vermont's had a good track record of grants, particularly with rail and.
they have, I mean, you know.
Is this the end of your slide?
This is the end, yep.
So, I want to go back, you know, obviously, I don't have a sense of where we are with our charging network throughout the state.
Mhm.
What's where we've actually got it in place
Yeah.
versus, you know, what's going to be in place and the funding is there. Is there a chart that?
There's not in this presentation.
I know, I'm just wondering, you know, in light of the money that's been put in, one would hope that there'd be some additional, there would be some
Would it have been
additions
you,
to the
Patrick, that
network.
presented that before, or somebody else?
Yes, I would have,
This year you presented it?
I believe so.
Okay.
Here,
It's gonna be online, right?
yeah, I'm just gonna see you,
So I can say just very briefly, you know, in terms of the fast charging network, we are at the very beginning, the agency, of getting out our funding, because it's taken so long for FHWA to actually issue their final rules around the program. Our first location will be developed sometime next month. But there's been all kinds of other investments that have been made by the state, and those have been traditionally managed by the Agency of Commerce and Community Development in partnership with all of the other agencies that participate in this interagency work group on EV charging, which includes Agency of Transportation, Public Service Department, Buildings and General Services, and others. So there's been quite a bit in terms of community charging that's been deployed. the $10 million that was authorized for that purpose back in 2022. 7 million of that is already sort of committed in applications over the past year. So there's been a lot of charging that has been deployed, and Vermont ranks pretty highly among states. Where it doesn't rank as highly, and this is in one of the prior presentations, is in the levels of charging and the amount of redundancy in our network. And so that's sort of our next phase of work.
If you've only got one fast charge and it's down, you're out of luck.
That's right. And so if one of the things that we're hoping to work on with the carbon reduction program is to get out a granting program that would start to replace some of that equipment that people have come to rely on and are disappointed when they arrive there and it's not functioning. To be able to get as much charging out as quickly as possible and work with those existing locations to deploy some funding fairly quickly. So.
So if you go up,
That's you?
no, this is maybe ahead.
This is what you want?
Or the other,
This is a map, I believe, from last year, maybe.
what was this last year's map?
So the plus sign if you wanted to zoom in.
This is our presentation for just January, but so this, yeah. Oh, you can do it all the way.
Level 2, so we're at level 3s.
Level 3 to the
What the green is.
fast charge, that's
Yeah,
the,
they're in.
Oh, community fast charge. Fast charge, I got you.
and then the other,
They're on a whole, like 91, where would that one be on 91?
the yellow thing is that Bradford.
It might be Bradford.
Yes,
That one there.
this one here.
Yeah,
Yeah, I believe that's Bradford.
because the other one is,
There were just this fall, there were 2 50 kilowatt stations that were opened in Bradford, and we're at that same location.
Hannaford store parking lot.
No, this is at Denny Park,
Oh, yeah, right in the
right
village.
near the town, yeah. And so that's where we're deploying another 4 much faster
Is that
chargers.
one of the Norwich Foundries?
That's right.
The first contract.
So it'll be 180 kilowatts of stations, 4 of them.
Well,
But they're in various stages. So there were 17 locations.
traveling, obviously the one, well, Hannaford's is closer to the interstate than going into actually downtown Bradford.
Yeah, and so it's there is a balance to be struck between, you know, making sure it's as convenient as possible, but also making sure that the significant investment is supporting that downtown. And so the federal guidelines don't give us a lot of.
Charging, you can eat.
Yeah, so there's,
Spend money.
so it's not just, you know, a lot of the, so there have been very few that have been deployed across the country so far. Only 3 locations in the entire country with this funding.
Huh.
And
With NEVI.
with NEVI funding, and they've
And
been,
Bradford is one.
Bradford will be
Like
the
the first
next.
Was the first one announced?
The first one was announced in December in Ohio, then New York, and now Pennsylvania in the past month. But all of them are just at truck stops. So it's not really kind of contributing to the community development in the same way that we're hoping our locations will here in Vermont. That we're not just deploying them in ways that get travelers to continue on their path, but that they're as convenient and at the same time contributing to local economic growth.
2 questions. One's related to this, and then a segue if the committee would allow me. So you said something about redundancy. In my data center days, we track to the minute how long services are up. Same with electricity, phone service. Are we tracking how the reliability and the uptime for these level 3 chargers, and does that cause concern for you?
We will be tracking the reliability of the chargers that we deploy, but we do not have insight necessarily into those charges that have already been deployed by some private entity without any sort of state or federal funding.
It'd be useful to collect that before we focus more on redundancy than build out.
So there's definitely, you know, different apps and things that are able to kind of crowdsource what's down at what point, and you know, what's in use, and so that is getting better. But I think, you know, what we're talking about here with the federal funds is a significant initial investment in the charging infrastructure that will be more reliable than what we have out there now, because it will be 4 stations minimum co-located. They'll have much higher power levels than what we have now out there. Instead of 50 or 62.5 kilowatt stations, we'll have, for the most part, 175 or 180 kilowatt stations. And so and in certain locations, our last plan, we identified kind of the confluence of the different routes, so that in some places we'll actually go well above that. We might double those. So there'd be 8 co-located stations, and some of them might be structured to serve pull-through parking for medium heavy-duty vehicles. And that might be even higher power level, 350 kilowatt stations that serve 2 vehicles at once, or 1 vehicle. So what we're going to build is going to be much more robust than what we have out there now. And I think our thought right now is to focus on that, because that's what people really need to have the confidence to go out and you know, actually purchase vehicles. In the meantime, though, there are these places that have existing infrastructure that's not working, or not working well, and we want to be able to identify those this year and get out money very quickly, so that those can be upgraded in a really cost-effective way.
So do you have a program to provide that, those grants for repairs?
We're working on that.
Okay.
Yeah.
You can use the NEVI money. You have to use other.
We could, but we have more flexibility with the carbon reduction program funds, so that it won't trigger necessarily a huge electrical infrastructure upgrade that would then, you know, greatly kind of increase the amount of time it costs to get the stations in place, and the costs themselves. So what we're trying to do is get as much charging out there as quickly as possible without triggering those higher costs and the longer term delays that would be related to, you know, a transformer that's 52 weeks out.
In time, you're going to need faster charging times, and it's nice to hear that, you know, you guys are making plans for that. But in the meanwhile, I bet there's some vehicles that even today, even as, you know, we're still in the infancy of it, that can't take the charge that fast.
That's right.
And so it's gonna take technology to catch up. If this is going to catch on, if it's going to do something different than what the Toyota CEO says, is that his estimation is that electric vehicles will never be more than 30% of what the total market is, then, you know, technology has to catch up. And to hear, you know, that's where we're headed is pretty awesome.
So I have a question, this Tom, are you responsible for it?
I believe so. It looks like, what's the title of it?
It's report to the legislature pursuant to 19 VSA section 2905
Yes.
on the
incentive
Clean
program.
Transportation Incentive Program. There's a lot in here.
There is a summary at the front. So
Which I have looked at. I'm just wondering, for all that is here, and the time and the resources, does it have the utility that would warrant the cost and the staff time to produce something of this detail and
Did
magnitude?
we ask you to produce it, or you had to produce it for some other reason?
it is required by statute, so that's why we produce it. But we also, the work that goes into that is critical to our understanding of how the programs are performing, and to be able to make recommendations to you all, and be able to make changes throughout the year. So the summary is, maybe 8 to 10 pages.
I don't know, I would hope, for example, the science of socio-technical transitions directs that each socio-technical barrier should be addressed by a holistic and comprehensive market intervention policy to accelerate the diffusion of technology. I want you to, have you,
AI wrote that.
That was not my writing.
uh-huh, and I love this graph on the diffusion of innovations, of course.
Yeah.
And, you know, so I just was like saying, boy, is this an example of our asking for something that created a product that required a lot more staff resources and time and does the value and the utility. Maybe it's to you, but I would suspect that the readers of this, for the committees that got it, if you gave them a quiz, might have a hard time even acknowledging they got the report. So I guess if that's something that we're continuing to have
Do you
done,
know if it's an annual report or just
It
for
is.
one time?
Yeah.
It's like,
Annual report.
so I guess what I'm asking really is, have we asked you to do something that the return is not worth what the obligation of, sometimes it's staff resources. I would say I'd much rather have staff spent on applying for grants and bringing in money than, you know, putting together something of this magnitude. It's not a criticism of you. You're responding to, you know, what we put into the statute. So, but you know, we might want to
yeah,
evaluate what the requirement is, or maybe you're wanting it to be more than it needs to be. I'm just really becoming much more concerned. Staff resources are no different than spending money. And we tend to be very cavalier and not think about it.
There's almost a time for a committee to review all
Well, we
requests.
do. We sort of do. Yes, you ought to see the pages that come into appropriations. I got this because of transportation. And it's interesting, it goes to the House Committee on Environment and Energy, but it doesn't go to our natural resources, and it goes to Senate Committee on Finance, but not House Ways and Means. So it's interesting, the committee, that it's, I don't know if we looked at that statute, but it's,
what's it called again, the report?
it's called the Status of the Vermont Clean Transportation Incentive Programs.
You know, UVM would want to get people to read stuff. I have quizzes. We should be quizzed as legislators for all these reports.
It's under,
No, you can't, well, I'm,
2900 is the statute.
yeah, it's 19 VSA section, so,
Would you, sorry.
So I appreciate those comments.
I'm concerned about, you know, the workload demands and how we,
I like to comment about, I'd rather have people out there applying for grants, getting this money, being a positive gain versus producing reams of paper.
so really it's, I'm talking about what, I'm not talking about you at all, Patrick, you're doing what we required you to do, or, I'm really raising the question about, a status report and how, if you could, I don't know, do we need to make recommendations? Are you making it more than it needs to be? What is here that has utility for legislative action or information? The House may have more time because they only serve on one committee. But I can tell you every report that just about the world comes to me in appropriations. And it's hard to keep up with them.
I would hope that the administration feels comfortable in communicating when they're being tasked with reports and they question the actual.
Well, I'm issuing them an invitation
Yeah, an
to say,
invitation.
is there something that we could, if we're doing more than, yeah.
Secondly, I'd love it if on every report we got, staff were mandated by statute to estimate the hours of staff time that were spent on that report, so that we could do quick calculations on the back of the napkin of what the average FTE of a state employee costs. I don't know if you have, if that's a rough estimate, how many hours of time was spent on that report.
Well, there's
So-
consultants and there,
So there's, it's sort of,
and I don't want you to feel you have to defend it. I think we're
No,
asking
so there's,
are ways
there
that
are
we can.
several reports kind of combined into it. And some of those reports are included in grant agreements so that the folks who are administering the programs on our behalf are doing that data analysis and submitting that to us. And what we try and do is then review all of that and boil it down to what is useful in terms of what has been achieved over the past year, and then what recommendations we might bring to you all for discussion. And so that's, if it's the sort of introduction to all of that, that needs to become sort of boiled down even more so that's usable for you all, then we'll certainly work on that.
I think Senator Kitchell, you have beat that drum a little bit, and the pro tems beat that drum a little bit, and I think it's a good avenue to go down to, you know, not to be so high and mighty as people sitting in a room just not wanting to deal with something and then ordering a study. I think that happened earlier in my time here. I see less of it, but it just so seems easy that it's just a way to push it down the road. No, we're not gonna deal with it now, but let's just get a study on, let's get a study on it. And I do feel that it probably comes from the House a little bit more than it comes from the Senate.
So maybe, did the rest of the committee receive this document? Because we could have, well, sort of like we did in appropriation.
Yeah, I thought we were supposed to do it.
So this is a this
No, this is
is,
the ones that we're supposed to be getting.
yeah,
But
so
I
but
don't
we
think I
could,
got that.
we could have village council walk through, we could have
Right here.
folks from, that's different.
That's
That is different.
We could have folks from AOT.
I can look and make a recommendation to us.
I think,
So maybe I'll send it to Michelle, this thing, and say, is there anything on here that the agency feels like is not a good use of
Or
time?
that what we're asking you to do, somehow the way we've defined it is more than we really need. So I'm just trying to be sensitive to, how we, what we have for requirements. And I bet if you asked, I would assume all the work here, if you were to ask how many legislators even know about it, much less have read it, well, that's not gonna happen because we don't get grades here. We only get the elections.
but I think it's only,
Pass fail.
I think it's only being
For 2
polite
years,
that
that's
if we ask for something, that we ought to have the courtesy to review it.
And we probably review the information, like Patrick said, they're doing this work anyway, so but sometimes just compiling it and getting it all organized takes a lot of time. And it's kind of like the discussion we had in appropriations this morning where the House and the budget adjustment they wanted to
Require.
We wanted to require the information to be sent to them, but they understand that the information is always there. They could always ask for it at any time, but they wanted it sent to them even if they might not actually look at it. We're saying like, if you want it, then you just ask for it. So it could be similar to this, like you do the work. If we want to know any of the information in there, you could put together a PowerPoint presentation and bring it in. Like, is the report needed, or is just the fact that you have the information sufficient?
So I will say that, you know, when we're in the House, for example, and there are new reports that are recommended or discussed, the agency does provide feedback on, you know, kind of the utility of that and what might work differently. So, but I appreciate the discussion.
Okay.
So the same topic. So this is all you have, right? So I'm not, okay. So when the secretary was before us presenting the FY25 budget, I remember making a note of this, and that Senator Kitchell asked a great question. There was an answer, but I said, I'd like to understand that more. And that is this slide right here, which it really shows the environmental policy and sustainability budget for FY24 at 27.9 million. Now it's down to 8.5 million with 69.6% decrease. It is unclear to me from what we've seen so far where that's from. Maybe you all understand it, but could you just speak to me at high levels why we have a $20 million decrease in your budget
Sure.
this year, which is effectively 70% decline?
The simplest, straightforward explanation is that we had all that federal money. So it's carbon reduction program funds, which is
Your big slugs gone through.
$6.3 million. We had protect funding is $7 million, and a lot of that too was accounting for 2 federal fiscal years of that funding. And then we had, it's the same thing for the National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Funds. Many of those projects ultimately will not show up in our budget. They did last year, but they will show up in basically bike and pedestrian projects. They will show up in public transit for the Sprinter vans the electric Sprinter vans that we're supporting through the carbon reduction program. So it just made more sense this year to keep what was actually going to show up in our budget ultimately to that $8 million number. So it's not that all that work is decreasing, it's just spread out across the agency in different programs and projects.
From your recollections, could you reflect on what the budget was before all that federal money from the sky came crashing down? So is this getting?
Well, there was no, we are now a distinct program, as we were not a program at that point.
We weren't born yet.
We weren't born yet, so it was just, so it was myself and you might remember Dan Dutcher before me.
Yeah.
We were in Policy Planning and Research Bureau.
It was just
reporting to Joe Zagami.
Dan Dutcher did.
That's right. So, so it's out of that influx of federal funds that it made sense to start to pull that out of the policy planning research budget and just create this new unit. Because we expect that there will be continued support for environmental work.
So short answer, if I could interpret what I just heard you say, is there were a bunch of federal one-time monies that you didn't use to stand up positions that need to be continued, and instead they are being fallen off on the budget, and that's why we're seeing a budget decline, which is what you should have done, and good work.
So it's just that the funding will show up. It hasn't gone away. It will show up in different program budgets. So you'll see
But
it.
maybe not at the same level that we got during some of this period of time. I don't know.
I guess I'm not following that.
Well, so we have 5 years.
Spread out.
So we have 5 years of funding through the federal authorization. And we're getting into year 4 of that. But so much of the program guidelines, for example, around NEVI took several years into it. And so the first 2 fiscal years, federal fiscal years, 22 and 23, were all sort of lumped together. So it appeared as though there was much more funding than on an annual basis than there actually was. So this is now kind of spreading it out, both in terms of the year, the time frame, but then also in terms of where the projects will show up. The funding, it won't be a EPS, environmental policy sustainability project. It will be a bike and pedestrian project. It will show up in.
So we might have another Patrick Murphy come in here, and some of that money is in that, and in that part over there.
That's right, like
Different-
Ross
different
McDonald.
part.
There won't be another Patrick Murphy. Not here, anyway. But Ross McDonald will
Right.
come in and talk about what's in his budget now for, $4 million for 20
And that came
Sprinter
from that
vans.
pot of money.
And that's right.
So, it's interesting here, for example, this report, or I guess it was done by the Center for Sustainable Energy, to look at recommendations. And I don't, my mind is, I'm trying to keep everything straight, but it's very interesting. They actually have said that the replace your ride, well, I don't know, and they recommend that we focus on the new PVE market first, and have a low income new PVE rebate that we should be looking at that would contribute, et cetera. And then they say the otherwise the scrap and replace rebate will have to greatly exceed the vehicle's residual value in order to promote a significant consumer, which makes the program expensive and inefficient. So I'm just wondering if at some point somebody's looking at these recommendations and would bring them. And the reason I'm kind of sensitive to it, I was looking at a report on programs that we have for loans and incentives for health careers. And embedded in that report are a variety of recommendations around statutory changes. And I was like, who is looking at that report to even act on that? And how would you know unless you took the time? And so I think we have to rely on the experts to say, maybe you want to relook at these incentives, or maybe, this particular approach is really not getting you where you need to be in terms of efficiency or, whatever. So,
Yeah, so we do take all of that information into account, but then we also do our own analyses, and we don't rely solely on our administrators to tell us, particularly when they're, benefiting from the funding to administer the programs. We look more holistically at the programs, and we recently did an analysis of the various incentive programs in terms of what they achieve when you look at greenhouse gas emissions reduced on a dollar basis. So what's more cost effective? New PV program is, we found is more effective. But it's not to say that
it's probably quite expensive when you're dealing with a new.
well, the amount of greenhouse, the CO2 reduced, so the metric tons of CO2 reduced per dollar spent is actually much higher for the new PEV program than the used
For the
program.
dollars spent,
And
yeah.
then, but then there are other considerations to take into account, which is that, like the Mileage Smart program and Replace Your Ride to some extent are not just climate programs, they're also social programs. And so there's also there a balance to be struck to make sure that people with lower incomes are able to access all of this new technology. So there's, we certainly take into account all of the work that's been done, but we do our own as well. And those recommendations get brought forward to the House to work into their version of the transportation bill if they see fit.
Well, then, and I understand that process, I guess by getting these reports, and it raises the question, were they vetted? And that your own independent analysis would say that may be a recommendation, but for these reasons, we do not recommend moving forward with it. Because there are others, recommended program improvements for new PVEs. I mean, you're very familiar with this report, so what you're saying is that even though it's a recommendation here, it might not be one that the agency would move forward with because of this additional.
Sure,
independent
and
analysis.
in other cases, it's more interactive. I mean, these reports are developed by a third party, but
It's
we're going,
dangerous to give it to us then if you've rejected it.
they're working with us. We're going through and revising as well, and introducing new considerations for them to take a look at. And so it's very much a collaborative process in coming up with those reports. And the incentive programs were modified. We did use the authorization that you all gave us this past year to modify the programs in ways that have greatly increased both the amount of vehicles that are now on the road, but also increased the amount of benefits going to households with lower incomes, which I think is, been a shared goal.
So we are contracted then with the center to do quite a bit of this.
That's right.
How much did we pay?
Well, we have a contract with them, and
Was this done under part of that contract then?
it's done under the
The reason I'm asking is,
state funding for the 22 transportation bill allowed an authorized up to 15% for administrative costs, and they are not hitting that upper limit with the grant agreement, but that's the funding pot that it comes from.
Okay, well, I think we can go through the report.
I think I really think we
Yeah.
owe it to
Yeah,
Um,
definitely.
welcome recommendations or how to give greater utility. I just,
Yeah, so I remember one time we just, in this committee, because we've talked about this before, we said, you just have to give an oral report. It was just like, that they had to come in here and
Yeah.
give us, come and give testimony, basically, instead of printing something or spending a lot of hours on it.
My problem with these reports is I find out the morning of that you're gonna present on it, and I just didn't know that we were gonna talk about it, and that's no fault, that's just the way the process works, but I could see value if you all in December, November do reports that you wanna come and present on, so that I can find the time to really dive into it, because that's about 4 hours of my time, and I'm a very busy person, and so just carving that out, and putting it in the
Right, and they do send them, but
and you
we
do
get
have
so
other
many.
things on weekends that you would maybe like,
kids that like
yeah.
Right, I mean, do we get them all sent to us, or sometimes they just get sent to Ledge Council or sent to, so they're on the report's website, but you're not spending your evenings wandering through the report's website to see which ones might be, that might come up. So, yeah,
There's a
recommended
tremendous
meeting
amount of
materials from
information
Trans
here.
would be great.
yeah, that would be good, so V-Trans could do it at the beginning, like when the secretary does the run through, and here are the highlights, the reports. Yeah, it could be in December.
Over Christmas break, holiday break.
Right.
Leading into the sessions.
So here are the highlighted reports. Okay, well, there'll be more to that. Any other questions for Patrick on the vehicles of the budget?
Thank you for indulging us.
Yeah.
Yeah,
No, I'm trying to help you
we're here
skinny
to help.
down your,
We're here to help.
if possible. Actually, it looks to me like,
Okay, well, if there's no other questions, we'll adjourn for the day.